Ruth Morrison was 32 years old when she began building cabin on her homestead claim near Helena, Montana Territory in August 1875, with design so unconventional that neighbors called it backward and impractical. She built firewood storage beneath living space rather than separate shed beside cabin. By February 1876, that backward design had proven superior to every conventional cabin in settlement, keeping her firewood perfectly dry while neighbors' supplies rotted from moisture and providing unexpected heating benefits no one had anticipated. Ruth was widow. Husband James had died in May 1875 from logging accident, crushed when tree fell incorrectly during clearing operation. Left her with 80-acre homestead claim, modest savings of $200, and determination to prove up claim herself rather than abandoning land and returning east to family. Montana Territory homestead law required building habitable dwelling and cultivating minimum acres within 5 years to gain permanent title. Ruth needed cabin before winter, had experience helping James build structures, but had never led construction project alone. Needed to build quickly, efficiently, and intelligently using limited resources. She'd observed cabin construction throughout Montana settlements and noticed consistent problem. Firewood storage was always separate structure or simple covered stack built outside cabin. This separation created multiple issues she'd witnessed repeatedly. First issue was moisture. Montana winters brought heavy snow, often 5 to 6 feet accumulation, that would surround any ground-level structure. Firewood stored in separate shed or covered stack had constant moisture exposure from snow contact, ground saturation, and humidity. Wood would absorb moisture, reducing burning efficiency, creating excess smoke, wasting fuel. Second issue was heat loss. Conventional cabin design meant opening door and going outside into -20 weather to retrieve firewood from separate storage. Each retrieval lost interior heat through open door and brought cold air inside. Multiple trips daily for fuel meant significant heat loss. Third issue was convenience. During severe blizzard conditions, traveling even 20 feet to separate shed could be dangerous. Whiteout conditions, -40 wind chill, unstable footing in deep snow. Retrieving firewood became hazardous necessity rather than simple task. Ruth conceived different approach based on principles she'd learned from root cellar construction, building storage beneath living space, creating integrated structure with shared benefits. She designed cabin with firewood storage built directly underneath living floor, creating crawl space that served dual purpose, stored approximately 10 cords of split wood, providing winter fuel supply, and created insulation layer between frozen ground and living space above. The design was unconventional enough that neighbors questioned her sanity. "You're building firewood storage underneath your cabin?" asked George Fletcher, who owned adjacent claim. "That's backward. Firewood belongs in separate shed where it won't create fire hazard near living space and where you can access it without crawling under your house. Building storage beneath cabin is inefficient and dangerous." Ruth explained her reasoning patiently. "Firewood beneath cabin stays drier than separate shed because it's protected from snow accumulation and ground saturation. Heat from living space above prevents moisture condensation. Access through interior hatch means retrieving fuel without going outside in blizzard. Design integrates storage with dwelling, creating efficiency. Heat rising from living space will make firewood storage too warm," Fletcher countered. "Wood needs to stay cool and dry, not warm. Your design will create moisture problems from temperature differential." But Ruth persisted, convinced her understanding was correct based on thermodynamics principles James had explained when they'd built root cellar that stayed remarkably dry despite being underground. August 15th through September 30th, she built the cabin working primarily alone, with occasional help from hired laborers when heavy lifting required multiple people. The construction required careful planning, executing unconventional design most builders would reject as impractical. Foundation construction began August 15th and was critical to entire integrated design. Conventional cabins sat directly on ground or on minimal stone foundation raising structure, perhaps 6 inches. Ruth's design required substantial elevation, creating meaningful crawl space beneath living floor. She positioned 12 foundation piers using large flat stones gathered from her property. Each pier consisted of stacked stones, creating column approximately 18 inches high, 24 inches square. Positioned piers in rectangle 16 feet by 20 feet. 4 piers at corners, 4 at midpoints of long sides, 4 at midpoints of short sides. This 12-pier configuration would support foundation beams and floor structure. The 18-inch elevation was carefully calculated. Needed sufficient height for firewood storage. Typical split log was 16 inches long, needed minimum 17-inch clearance for comfortable stacking. Also needed clearance for crawling access during initial loading and occasional maintenance. 18 inches provided barely adequate workspace while minimizing excessive elevation that would waste materials and create cold airspace. Foundation beams were massive timbers, 10 by 12 inches, 16 and 20 feet long, salvaged from abandoned mining operation 15 miles away. Hauled timbers using borrowed wagon, making 3 trips over 2 days. Positioned beams on pier tops, creating rectangular frame. Secured beams with iron brackets preventing shifting. Crawl space enclosure required building 3 stone walls between piers on north, east, and west sides. Used fieldstone gathered from property, approximately 8 tons total stone estimated. Built dry stack walls without mortar, stacked stones carefully creating stable 18-inch high barriers filling spaces between piers. Left south side open for access and ventilation. South side access was wooden door frame fitted with hinged door, measuring 4 feet wide, 18 inches high, large enough to crawl through while loading firewood, but small enough to minimize heat loss. Installed louvered vents in door, allowing continuous air circulation while blocking snow and rain entry. North side ventilation used gaps between stones in dry stack wall, creating natural venting. Air would enter through south louvers, flow through storage space, exit through north gaps. Crude but functional ventilation system driven by natural convection and wind pressure differential. Floor construction required precision, ensuring adequate strength while accommodating access hatches. Laid floor joists, 2 by 8 boards, every 16 inches spanning between foundation beams. This close spacing provided strength supporting cabin structure and furniture above, while storing perhaps ton of firewood below. Covered joists with 1-inch thick planking creating solid floor surface, but strategically left 3 30-inch square openings uncovered creating hatch locations. Positioned hatches near cabin walls where they wouldn't interfere with central living space or furniture. Built fitted lids for each hatch using same planking. Removable covers that sat flush with floor when closed, lifted out when accessing firewood. Wall construction followed conventional log cabin methods, but starting from elevated floor rather than ground level. Built post and beam frame using vertical 6x6 posts at corners and intervals. Connected posts with horizontal beams creating structural skeleton. Covered frame with horizontal log siding, split logs 6 inches thick, creating weathertight wall. Chinked gaps between logs with moss gathered from nearby creek. Covered moss with clay, mixed with grass, creating insulating barrier. Walls reached 8 feet above floor, creating adequate interior height. Roof was simple gable design. 2 slopes meeting at central ridge creating triangular profile. Ridge beam 16 feet long supported by vertical posts from floor. Rafters descended from ridge to wall tops, creating 45-degree slope that shed snow effectively. Covered rafters with cedar shakes installed with proper overlap, preventing rain penetration. Heating stove installation required strategic positioning, maximizing benefit to underfloor storage. Positioned stove in cabin center, 8 feet from each end wall, 8 feet from each side wall. This centered location distributed heat evenly to living space. But critically, positioned stove directly above central area of crawl space storage, ensuring heat radiated downward to firewood below. Stove sat on stone base, preventing fire hazard to wooden floor. Stovepipe rose vertically through ceiling and roof, creating draft for combustion, heat radiating from stove sides and bottom-warmed floor planking, which conducted warmth into crawl space below. Total construction time was 6 weeks, August 15th through September 30th, working alone with occasional hired help. Cost approximately $140 broken down. Salvaged materials including foundation beams and some lumber cost $30 transport and minimal payment. Purchased lumber for floor joists and planking cost $40. Log siding and chinking materials cost $20. Roofing shakes cost $25. Stove and pipe cost $15. Hired labor for heavy lifting cost $10. By October, first cabin was complete from exterior view, appearing conventional. 16 by 20-foot log cabin with gable roof and central chimney, typical Montana homestead dwelling. But underneath was innovation that would prove superior to conventional design. She spent October cutting and splitting firewood to fill integrated storage. Cut mixed pine and fir from timbered acres on her claim using borrowed crosscut saw and axe. Felled dead standing trees, dry seasoned timber requiring minimal additional drying, cut to 16-inch lengths matching standard firewood dimensions, split large pieces to 4 to 6-inch diameter maximizing surface area for drying and burning, hauled cut wood to cabin using small handcart making dozens of trips, stacked carefully in crawl space storage entering through south access door. Organized wood in rows running east-west with gaps between rows creating air circulation paths. Filled approximately 800 cubic feet of storage space with properly stacked firewood. Estimated 10 cords total, providing fuel for 5-month winter November through March. Neighbors who observed her stacking firewood beneath cabin continued expressing skepticism. That wood is going to rot from moisture and poor ventilation, predicted Sarah Morrison, who lived 3 miles away. Underground storage without proper air circulation creates damp conditions. Your firewood will be moldy and unusable by midwinter. You'll end up cutting emergency fuel in January when you discover your stored supply is ruined. The heat from your cabin floor will create condensation, added Thomas Whitfield. Warm air from above meeting cold ground below produces moisture. Your firewood will be soaked from condensation, even if it stays dry from external weather. You've created expensive problem instead of using proven storage methods. But Ruth had designed ventilation into her crawl space. The south-facing access door had louvered vents allowing air circulation. Small vents near floor joists on north side created cross-flow. Air would enter south side, flow through storage space, exit north side carrying moisture away. Natural convection from warmth above would drive circulation. November brought first test of design as temperature dropped and snow accumulated. By mid-November, Montana had 18 inches of snow on ground, with temperature averaging 10 degrees daytime, -5 nighttime. Conventional firewood storage throughout settlement began showing problems Ruth had anticipated. Separate sheds and covered stacks were surrounded by snow, creating constant moisture exposure. Even well-built sheds had floors sitting on frozen, saturated ground, creating moisture wicking into bottom logs. Tarped stacks had snow accumulating on covers, melting during daytime sun, refreezing at night, creating ice and moisture penetration. George Fletcher stored his firewood in dedicated shed 20 feet from cabin, standard approach used by 80% of settlement. Well-built shed with proper roof and walls, but floor was packed earth directly on ground. By late November, snow had accumulated 3 feet around shed. Ground moisture from melting snow base was wicking upward into bottom 2 cords of his 6-cord supply. Wood was reaching 25% moisture, burnable but inefficient, requiring extra fuel to drive off water before combustion. Sarah Morrison used covered stack approach, firewood piled on wooden pallets with heavy tarp covering. Better than ground contact, but inadequate for Montana snow conditions. Snow accumulated on tarp, creating pools of meltwater that seeped through seams. Wind drove snow under tarp edges. By December, her entire 5-cord supply was at 20 to 30% moisture from snow exposure and humidity. Ruth's under-cabin storage was performing exactly as she'd designed. Crawl space was protected from snow accumulation by cabin structure above. Ground moisture was blocked by stone floor and elevated foundation, preventing upward wicking. Most surprisingly, heat from cabin living space and stove above was creating beneficial warming effect she'd understood theoretically, but hadn't fully anticipated practically. The cabin floor, heated from above by living space and stove, radiated warmth downward into crawl space storage. This warmth kept firewood temperature perhaps 10 to 15 degrees above exterior temperature. When outside temperature was -5, crawl space was approximately 10 degrees. This warming had multiple beneficial effects. First benefit was preventing condensation. Condensation forms when warm, moist air contacts cold surface, causing moisture to precipitate. But Ruth's firewood wasn't cold. It was warmed by heat from above, matching approximately the temperature of air in crawl space. No temperature differential meant no condensation formation. Second benefit was promoting continued drying. Firewood at 10 degrees with air circulation was continuing to lose residual moisture through evaporation and ventilation. Wood that had been 15% moisture when stored in October was reaching 12 to 13% by December. Even drier than initial storage, creating exceptionally efficient fuel. Third benefit was comfort during retrieval. Opening interior hatch-accessed storage space that was 10 degrees rather than exterior temperature of -5. Reaching down into relatively warm space to grab firewood was far more comfortable than going outside into bitter cold. The 15-degree temperature difference seemed minor, but made significant practical difference during daily fuel retrieval. December brought severe test when sustained cold dropped temperature to -20 for entire week, December 15th through 22nd. This was coldest December in Montana territorial records and revealed catastrophic differences between conventional firewood storage and Ruth's integrated design. At -20 sustained temperature, every aspect of firewood storage was tested to extremes. Any moisture present in wood would freeze solid. Any design weakness allowing snow or humidity penetration would create ice formation. Any inefficiency in retrieval process would waste precious heat. This was ultimate test of storage design under worst-case conditions. George Fletcher's separate shed storage showed multiple cascading failures under extreme cold. His shed was well-built structure, proper roof, solid walls, raised floor using pallets on packed earth. By conventional standards, it was good firewood storage. But conventional standards hadn't anticipated -20 sustained cold with 6 feet of snow accumulation. First problem was ground moisture freezing. The shed floor, wooden pallets sitting on packed earth, had been adequate during autumn. But December snow accumulation reached 6 feet around shed, creating massive snow mass. During occasional daytime warming, when sun hit south-facing snow, outer layers would melt slightly, creating moisture. This moisture would seep into ground beneath shed. At night, when temperature dropped to -20, this moisture froze solid, creating ice layer beneath pallets. Bottom cords of firewood sitting on pallets were actually frozen to pallet surface through ice bonding. When Fletcher tried retrieving morning firewood December 16th, logs wouldn't lift from stack, frozen solid to pallets. Required using iron pry bar breaking ice bonds, taking perhaps 20 minutes of brutal work in -20 cold inside unheated shed to free dozen logs for morning fire. Second problem was humidity condensation freezing. The shed interior, unheated, enclosed, containing wooden materials, developed humidity from wood, naturally releasing moisture. During daytime, when temperature rose to -10, this humidity would form slight condensation on cold log surfaces. At night, when temperature dropped to -20, condensation froze, creating frost coating on every log surface. Each piece of firewood Fletcher retrieved had quarter-inch frost layer coating bark and wood surface. Bringing frosted logs inside warm cabin created immediate melting, producing puddles, required brushing frost off outside before bringing in or accepting wet mess near stove. Third problem was snow penetration, creating ice formation. Despite solid roof, wind-driven snow found entry through inevitable gaps where walls met roof and around door edges. Fine snow powder would penetrate during storms, settle on firewood, melt slightly during daytime warming, refreeze at night. By December 20th, middle and top cords had visible ice coating from this repeated snow penetration and freeze cycle. Fourth problem was retrieval heat loss. Each time Fletcher needed firewood, typically 6 to 8 times daily for steady burning, required putting on heavy coat and boots, opening heated cabin door into -20 cold, walking 20 feet through deep snow to shed, opening unheated shed door, prying frozen wood from stack, brushing frost and ice, carrying armload back through snow, entering cabin bringing cold air with him, removing coat and boots. This process took approximately 15 minutes per trip, including dressing, travel, retrieval, return, undressing. Lost significant cabin heat through open door and cold air entry, required burning extra fuel to re-warm cabin after each retrieval. The inefficiency compounded, burned extra fuel, required more frequent retrieval, lost more heat, required even more fuel. Vicious cycle of inefficiency. By December 20th, Fletcher estimated he was burning perhaps 40% more firewood than should be necessary. Combination of frozen wet wood requiring extra heat to drive off ice, frequent door openings losing heat, and cold air infiltration requiring extra warming meant his 6-cord supply was depleting at rates suggesting he'd run out by late January instead of lasting through February as calculated. Sarah Morrison's covered stack storage showed even worse problems. Her approach, firewood piled on pallets with heavy tarp covering, had advantages of simplicity and low cost, but catastrophic weaknesses during extreme conditions. The tarp, adequate for light rain, was overwhelmed by 6 feet of snow accumulation. Snow would pile 4 feet deep on tarp, creating massive weight. Weight would compress tarp onto firewood, eliminating air gaps. Compressed tarp would hold moisture against wood. Snow on tarp would melt slightly during daytime sun, creating water pools on tarp surface. Water would seep through tarp seams and weave, dripping onto wood below. At -20, this moisture froze, creating solid ice sheet coating firewood stack. Morrison's entire 5-cord supply was encased in ice layer, 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick by mid-December. Retrieving firewood required using axe to chip through ice coating, breaking apart frozen logs, carrying ice-covered wood inside. Once inside, ice-covered logs required warming near stove to melt ice coating before wood would burn. Process wasted significant heat. Perhaps 20% of first hour's fire heat was consumed melting ice rather than warming cabin. The wet wood from melted ice would hiss and steam, produce thick smoke, burn inefficiently. Morrison estimated she was burning 50% more firewood than necessary, compensating for ice formation and wet wood inefficiency. Her 5-cord supply, calculated for 4-month winter, would last perhaps 8 weeks at current consumption rate. Thomas Whitfield used variation on separate shed, 3-sided structure with roof but open south face, allowing sun exposure, supposedly keeping wood dry. This design worked reasonably well during normal Montana winter with light snow, but December conditions revealed fatal flaw. The open south face, intended for sun drying, allowed wind-driven snow to blow directly into storage. Every storm deposited snow throughout firewood stack. Snow would settle between logs, melt during daytime, refreeze at night. By late December, Whitfield's firewood was literally embedded in ice matrix, logs frozen together in solid mass, requiring breaking apart with sledgehammer. Retrieval from three-sided shed meant working in completely exposed conditions during -20 cold. No protection from wind while breaking apart frozen mass and loading firewood. Whitfield was suffering early frostbite symptoms on fingers and face from repeated exposure during daily retrieval. Ruth's undercabin storage was performing spectacularly well by comparison, demonstrating benefits of integrated design under worst-case conditions. First benefit was complete snow protection. Cabin structure above provided absolute barrier against snow accumulation. 6 feet of snow could accumulate in yards surrounding cabin, but 0 snow reached crawl space storage. Access door faced south under cabin overhang, creating additional protection. Storage remained completely snow-free throughout December storms. Second benefit was ground moisture protection. The elevated foundation on stone piers kept floor 18 inches above ground level. Ground moisture from melting snow couldn't wick upward through stone piers. Even if ground beneath cabin was saturated and frozen, moisture couldn't reach firewood stored on elevated floor. Third benefit was heat from above, preventing freeze. This was most surprising beneficial effect Ruth had understood theoretically, but seeing proven practically was remarkable. The cabin floor, heated by living space and stove above, radiated warmth downward into crawl space. When exterior temperature was -20, crawl space temperature measured approximately 8 to 10 degrees, 30 degrees warmer than outside. This warmth prevented moisture freezing. Any residual moisture in wood or humidity in air remained liquid at 10 degrees, rather than freezing solid at -20. No ice formation, no frost coating, no frozen logs. Wood remained dry and frost-free, ready to burn immediately. Fourth benefit was continued drying. The warm, dry environment in crawl space with air circulation from south to north ventilation was actually continuing to dry firewood. Wood stored at 15% moisture in October had reached 12 to 13% by December. Even drier than initial storage, creating exceptionally efficient fuel, producing maximum heat per log with minimal smoke. Fifth benefit was convenient warm retrieval, opening interior hatch-accessed storage space at 10 degrees rather than exterior -20. Reaching down into relatively warm crawl space to grab firewood was comfortable compared to going outside. No heavy coat needed, no trudging through snow, no cold air blast into cabin. Lift hatch, grab 3 or 4 logs, close hatch, add to fire. 30 seconds total with minimal heat loss. The practical difference was dramatic. Fletcher needed perhaps 45 minutes each morning to retrieve frozen firewood, pry it from ground, brush off ice, bring inside, allow thawing, then finally start fire. Lost significant heat during this process through open doors and time required. Ruth needed perhaps 2 minutes total, lift interior hatch, reach down into relatively warm storage, grab armload of dry unfrozen wood, close hatch, start fire immediately. No heat loss through exterior doors, no thawing required, no wasted time or fuel. December 28th. During coldest period, Fletcher visited Ruth, bringing his family, wife and 3 children, seeking temporary shelter after their cabin became dangerously cold from inadequate heating. Their frozen damp firewood wouldn't sustain proper fire. Interior temperature had dropped to 35 degrees despite burning wood constantly. Children showed early cold stress symptoms. Ruth welcomed them to her cabin, which was comfortably warm. Interior temperature around 65 degrees from efficient burning of perfectly dry firewood. Fletcher was amazed by warmth, despite cabin being similar size to his. "Your cabin is remarkably warm," Fletcher observed. "How are you maintaining this temperature when I can barely keep 40 degrees burning wood constantly?" Ruth showed him interior hatch access to under-cabin storage, lifted lid revealing dry firewood stored below, explained heating benefits from design integration. Heat from your stove and living space warms the storage area, keeping firewood dry and preventing ice formation. The dry wood burns efficiently, providing maximum heat per log. You're using perhaps half the firewood I'm using to achieve double the heating, because your fuel is dry while mine is frozen and damp. The design I mocked as backward is actually brilliant thermodynamic integration. Fletcher family stayed 2 days while weather moderated. During that time, Fletcher examined Ruth's design carefully, taking notes and measurements. When he returned home, he began planning modifications to his cabin, adding underfloor storage for next winter. Word spread through settlement about Ruth's innovative design. January brought steady stream of neighbors visiting to examine unusual under-cabin storage that was outperforming conventional separate sheds and covered stacks. Sarah Morrison visited January 15th after struggling for weeks with damp firewood from her covered stack. "I was wrong about moisture and condensation," Morrison admitted. "I assumed underground storage would be damp, but you've created dry, warm environment through heat integration and ventilation. Your firewood is drier than mine sitting outside under tarp. The design I called impractical is actually superior to conventional approach." Thomas Whitfield examined crawl space structure carefully, measuring dimensions and noting construction details. "This integrated design provides multiple benefits I didn't consider," he said. "Dry firewood from protected storage, heating efficiency from no exterior door opening, insulation benefit from airspace beneath cabin floor, convenient access during severe weather. You've solved several problems simultaneously with single innovative design." Through remainder of winter 1875 to 76, Ruth's cabin remained consistently warm and comfortable, while neighbors struggled with moisture-damaged firewood and heating inefficiency. Her 10 cords of stored firewood lasted entire winter, with 1 cord remaining in spring, evidence of superior fuel efficiency from consistently dry wood. By contrast, Fletcher burned 8 cords, achieving inferior heating, required extra fuel compensating for moisture content and ice formation. Morrison burned 7 cords with similar inefficiency. Other neighbors using conventional storage showed similar patterns: 20 to 30% excess fuel consumption compensating for moisture problems Ruth's design eliminated. Spring 1876 brought recognition of Ruth's innovation. Helena newspaper published article about the widow who built backward cabin that proved superior to conventional design. Article described under-cabin firewood storage, explained thermodynamic benefits, included construction diagrams for others to replicate. Over following years, under-cabin storage became increasingly common throughout Montana Territory, particularly in areas with heavy snow. Approximately 40 families built similar integrated storage, either as modifications to existing cabins or as design element in new construction. Ruth's backward approach became recognized best practice for snow country homesteading. She lived on homestead 18 years total, proving upclaim in 1880, receiving permanent title. Married in 1883 to carpenter named Eric Larson, who specialized in building integrated storage cabins based on Ruth's original design. They established successful construction business building innovative cabins throughout Montana Territory. Ruth lived until 1941, dying at age 98. Her obituary in Helena newspaper focused on the under-cabin firewood storage innovation, the design neighbors mocked as backward that proved superior to conventional approach and became standard practice throughout Montana Territory. Modern building science recognizes benefits Ruth discovered empirically. Underfloor storage using heat from living space creates dry environment, preventing moisture accumulation. Ventilated crawl space with controlled air circulation maintains optimal conditions. Integration of storage with dwelling improves energy efficiency by eliminating heat loss from exterior door operation and utilizing waste heat for beneficial purpose. The story is about widow who needed to build cabin quickly and efficiently, who observed problems with conventional designs and conceived unconventional solution, who endured skepticism from neighbors who judged unfamiliar approach as backward without understanding thermodynamic principles, who proved through practical results that innovation based on scientific understanding could exceed conventional wisdom. Because sometimes what appears backward is actually forward. Sometimes the design everyone questions becomes the design everyone adopts. Sometimes widow building alone with limited resources creates innovation that transforms standard practice. And sometimes the best solution isn't the one everyone uses. It's the one that actually works better when you understand the science.